Good day to you. Welcome again to our little kitchen. Today we're going to be making a chili con carne, and we're making a very big recipe. If you can see the pot that's back here, that's what we're going to try to fill. I like to make chili for the winter because it's a very hearty meal and it's something that warms you to the bones. So stay tuned. After the quick break, we're going to get right to it. See you then. Before we get going, I'd like to talk to you about the ingredients that I'm going to use. Now, this is my recipe for chili con carne. It's not everybody else's recipe. Your mileage may vary and you may not have all these same ingredients, but I try to keep it as simple as possible. So these are things that are very, very easy to find. It should make your life easy if you're trying to recreate this recipe, but you may prefer to use other ingredients. Feel free. Improvising is part of the fun of working in the kitchen. So without further ado, let me introduce you to some of the ingredients that we have here. So I'm going to start with this. It's regular chili powder. It's my local brand here. None of this is sponsored. I just happen to have these on hand, so this is the ones I'm just going to show you. These are peppercorns, so they're the seeds that you have inside of peppers. I add a good quantity of these, so we'll get back to that in a minute. I have two very large Spanish onions. Well, I think they're large for this time of the year. You get larger ones in the summer. Kind of an obvious one. We're going to need to have chili beans. So, I'm sorry, kidney beans, my apologies. So with kidney beans, we'll talk about proportions in a minute because you may not want to make a big recipe as I am, and that may change things significantly, but I'll tell you about the proportions of this in just a minute. After that, regular black pepper, some Italian spices. I rarely cook beef without it. Worcestershire sauce or Worcestershire sauce, depending on your inclinations. Barbecue sauce. Now this is to sweeten it, so you can make your own with maple syrup and some chili powder and some Worcestershire sauce yourself, but I figure I got some handy. I'm going to use this. 2 large green peppers. So that's it pretty much for the ingredients. Oh yes, one more. Beef. So I like to use half lean beef, but you can use full lean beef, and you could use half and half with ground pork and beef if you'd like to. That works out quite well for most people. Before we do anything else, we're going to prepare our vegetables. We're going to also prepare our meat. We're going to make sure that our big pot is on the stove for when we're ready to cook. So let's prepare the vegetables real quick and we'll get to it. So when it comes to preparing onions, I don't think there's a big secret. However, people will tell you if you do wear glasses, they recommend that you wear them. When you cut an onion, if your knife is not perfectly sharp, it's going to squeeze some of the cells and some of the juice is going to fly and become vapor in the air, and some of them are going to head for your eyeballs. So if you do have glasses, it will mitigate that, will not stop it completely. And the other trick is to make sure that your knife is really, really sharp. So if you have done both and you have your glasses, suggest you put them on. If not, sharpen it. Let's get to it. When it comes to sharpening a knife, you can use a saber like I have here. It's a bit short. I prefer them to have longer. I still haven't got my long one yet. But they also have instruments that you can get in hardware stores where you just slide your knife back and forth, and I'm sorry, only back. You're supposed to pull it towards you when you're using it. Those work out well. However, you have a little bit less control on the pitch that you're going to sharpen. So using a saber, you get used to it after a while. If you're too flat on it and you're going like this, well, you're going to feel that it's just sliding and it's not doing anything. And when you have the right pitch, you can just start to feel a little bit of a bite into it when you're doing it. And I have no pretensions of being one of those chefs on TV that goes slack, 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 and it's done. I got to take my time to do this. So I'm going to do it off camera and I'll get right back to you. So after you sharpen your knife, I do recommend that you wet it. There are going to be fine metal particles on it, and wipe it on your cloth. If you're like me, you have one of these, you can just wipe it on your shirt. So let's prepare the onion. Now, to peel an onion, there doesn't seem to be any real magic. This is how I like to do it. So I'm going to start by removing the ends because they're of no use to me anyway. So let's chop those off. Let me change the camera for you. So yeah, I'm going to chop these off. And what often happens when I start chopping the end, you can see that it starts to peel on its own. So I'll grab that and I'll pull on it. And typically, the first peel all comes off pretty much on its own. Like, bam, done. Pro tip for you guys, keep a plastic container when you buy a gallon of ice cream. It's really convenient for putting all of your shavings and cuttings into it so that you don't have to do 15 trips to your compost pail or your garbage pail. I hope you're using composting, but I find this very convenient to have this on hand. Okay, so let's get back to our onion. Bam. All right, so a good trick to make sure that you don't cut your fingers is you want to have the onion as stable as possible. This rolls, this is no good. So the first thing I like to do is cut it in half, as so, or just about. And now I have a flat side, so that can't roll anymore. So that makes it a lot easier to cut. And when you cut, look how my fingers are. They're bent inwards. So when I put the knife on it, can't really cut on my fingers. Let me try to do this from the other side. So you see, my finger can't stick out and I can't chop them. So some of you might say that, hey, I'm clumsy enough, I could chop them anyway. Okay, well, good for you, that is possible. But it's all about minimizing the chances of you causing yourself an injury. So bending the knuckles like that is a good way to avoid that happening. And as you may detect from my chopping technique or my non-chopping technique, depending how you want to look at it, I'm not trying to do this artistically at all. I'm just trying to reduce the size of this onion to something that is going to be manageable once it's in the chili. Now when it comes to chili con carne, there's really no point in chopping your onion too fine. Let's have a little look here at what it looks like in my plate. A little bowl here. So look, you really don't need to chop it much finer than that. Chili con carne is meant to be a little bit chunky, and I hope that you enjoy it that way too. As I'm preparing the second onion, it occurs to me that I should tell you that when you peel an onion and you remove more than the first peel, the subsequent peels sometimes are very moist, which makes them very slippery. So do be careful when you're chopping your onions. Your fingers are kind of important. Okay, now that we've finished processing the onion, we're going to start processing the peppers. I know some of you are going to be a little bit puzzled on how am I planning to cut this up very fine with this big, or rather squarish knife that I have. And in fact, it's not really a trick at all, but when you think about it, if you're cutting the pepper, depending on what you're exactly trying to do is perform surgery or just chop something up, there's actually a very easy trick to it, and let me show you in just a second here. So what I do is, well, like I did before, I just cut the thing in half, then it allows me to use the tip of the blade here to cut out the parts that I'm not interested in quite easily. There you go. Boom. Like that. And if there's part inside that I still don't want, well, I'm going to cut it again and then I can address it laterally like this. And that's all there is to it. Same thing for the other guy. Now I have the experience of knowing if I chop this in a quarter, it's going to be easier. Or do it again. Chop, 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 chop. And there we go. Same thing with this guy here. Sorry for loud noises. Boom. Boom. A couple of seeds here and there, which I really don't mind actually, when they're going to be all cooked into the pot. And that's pretty much how I am going to process the peppers. Now I find peppers a little bit tricky to process because they are round on all sides, and pretty much no matter what you do. And so again, chop them grossly so that we still get a little bit of chunks for our chili. So for those who have joined my channel and have seen this before, you might be wondering how come I'm using more than one container for the preparation of my vegetables and ingredients, because you would know that I'm lazy and I like to use just one when I can, a larger one if I have to. And I usually prepare my ingredients in the reverse order, so then the first ones that go in the pot are on top. Today, completely missed it. I'm doing it completely opposite. It's opposite day, so my apologies, but usually I like to do these in the reverse order, that they're going to go in the pot, so that way I can use one bowl and just stack them up and put them, the ones that are the last are going to be on top, obviously, and those are the first ones that are going to go into the pot. I didn't do that today. My apologies. Let's try this again some other time. Sorry for the people who are subscribing to my channel and they haven't heard from me for a while. I've gotten a little lazy this summer, and a lot of the stuff I did was redundant. I do a lot of barbecuing in the summer, and I didn't think that would interest you that much. I do have some clips that I can upload to show you some of the cuts of meat that I've done and some of the stuff I've been eating. But anyways, I wanted to really spend some time showing you some of the tips and tricks and techniques that I use when I'm doing some cooking, and a little bit more, I wouldn't say complicated, but more elaborate recipes. So I think this qualifies, so that's why I decided to share it with you. So my apologies for people who have subscribed to my channel and haven't seen me in a while. It's not that I don't like you and I don't want to do this anymore. Quite the opposite. It's just that I've been a little bit busy, a little bit lazy, you know, a mix of all stuff, and life has been happening. So in the meanwhile, thank you for joining me again this time. So getting back to that note I was telling you about before, when you chop onions and that mist that goes all over the place and makes your eyes want to cry because it gets in there. I find that cutting peppers is a very good way to experience that, because peppers, the juice in it somehow feels very cold and very cool to the touch. So when you're chopping it, if your knife has gotten a little bit dull, when you chop, there's a lot of that juice splashing, and you can feel it all over your arms. And you know, that kind of makes you understand what happens to the onions as well. So I just thought it was an interesting anecdote that I should share with you guys. So we just finished processing the vegetables, and now we're going to prepare the meat. Now there's not a gazillion things to do with the meat. I need to unpack it, and I have to make it ready to dump into the pot. But before I am going to put the pot in, I'm going to use a bit of the onions to create a bed on which the meat is going to lie when it's cooking. So I'm just going to unpack the meat here, and then we'll get to the stove, and we're going to look at how that's going to go in just a second. Welcome back. So we've set up differently. As you can see, I'm repositioned the cameras, and we are now going to be doing the cooking part. It's as interesting and part of a cooking show, you'd say. So sorry about the artisanal setup. I promise you one day it will be set up a lot better than this, and I'll have something hooked up on the top here that will be magnetic and whatnot. But for today, I suppose this will suffice. A little ingredient that I haven't mentioned before that I like to use a lot when I'm doing cooking, sorry about the lighting, is this little boy over here. It's avocado oil. I think it's the only real reason we should be growing avocados, because it has a very high smoke point. So when you're cooking, compared to, let's say, olive oil, this will get a lot hotter before it starts to burn, and it's good for you. So this is an ingredient I didn't mention that we're going to be using. I'm going to put it in the bottom of the pot, and that's what I'm going to use to start grilling the onions. Check it out. So I'm setting my heat on high, and don't you fret about what's in the bottom there, that's just water. I like to get my pots a nice once over before I start anything with them. So I'm going to throw the oil in there, grab my onions, toss just a handful in there. And while these start to crack, I wanted to address the situation that we had with the other ingredients that I told you about. So I'm going to be making, as you can see, a very large recipe, which means probably, unless you're going to do exactly the same thing as me, and this is about, I'd say, 2.5 gallons. If you're going to make, and that's about, I would say, 10 liters. If you are going to make a recipe about this size for yourself, then you can just go ahead and follow this word for word. But of course, most people, I guess your pot is going to be this size. You're going to have everything I've been doing so far. So half of this recipe is quite reasonable as far as a fairly large pot goes. But since I'm making a really, really huge pot of it, what I estimate to be a very huge pot of it, go ahead and prepare to have it. So in this recipe, I got a kilogram, or if you would like, about 4 pounds of, 4.5 pounds of, I'm going to bring this down a little bit, 4.5 pounds of ground beef. I have 9 cans. I have 9 cans of chili, and I'm going to be using, I'm cheating, I always do this, I use jars of spaghetti sauce to prepare it. Why? 2 reasons. Spaghetti sauce jars are really convenient to reuse to put this in afterwards. So there's a pro tip for you. Half of my recipe is going to go back into the jars, and then the rest are going to go into containers that are more freezer friendly. All right, so here we go. We're going to toss in the beef now, literally. In you go. This is when I bring out my Italian spices. So the Italian spices are going to go on the beef. I'm going to break down the beef with my wooden spatula here. And some of you might be wondering, well, why don't I cook my beef in a pan? Obvious answer is a pan would create splashing. So when you fry stuff, if you can, use a taller pot, you'll end up doing a lot less cleaning. So now that it's broken up, I'm going to grab my Italian spices, and I'm going to add about 2 heaping tablespoons of this. So if you're having the recipe, it would be only 1. I love the smell of this with beef. I remember the first time I had this, when my mother was cooking, and ever since I've been a big fan of this. So we are going to cook our beef at medium heat for a little while now. Now we want to make sure that our beef is nice and brown before we do anything else. You really don't want to mess with uncooked beef or any meats for that matter. So we're going to speed this up. We're going to get this cooked and then we'll get back to you. One of the things about using a pan like this one when you're cooking and you're trying to film it, the steam has a tendency to rise straight up and none of it goes sideways. So it's a little bit difficult to film when you're using a pot like this, so bear with us please. Now this is one of the very rare recipes where I'm actually going to use salt. But I am not going to use a lot of salt. I plan on using about 1.5 tablespoons. So go ahead, get your salt out because we're going to need it in a minute. So I have a 100-gram packet of chili powder here. I just added half of it in there. So if you at home are going to create half of the recipe, you would put a quarter packet. So instead of putting in 50 grams, you would put in only 25. So you can also use some of that old El Paso chili envelopes, but they have salt in them. So if you're going to use those, you would use for half the recipe 2 envelopes, and if you're going to use the recipe the same as mine, you're going to use 4 envelopes, but do remember to skip the salt. All right, let's get back to mixing this guy. Now, if everything gets slightly reddish in color, it means you have about the right quantity of chili powder. Now, I'm seeing here, mine is a little light, so I'm going to add some more. Keep in mind, whenever you're doing some cooking, it's a lot easier to short a recipe of something, especially when you're cooking like this, and then add some later on, than put too much from the onset and even consider trying to remove some. So I'm actually happy that I'm adding some rather than having noticed that, oh well, this is way too dark. And this is almost perfect. I'm going to add a little bit more. I'm eyeballing this. I could have used a scale, which probably would have given me better results. And I would say I'm about 3/4 of the packet now. Oh, this is really starting to smell good, folks. And you know what? The heck with it. I like things spicy. There goes the entire packet. Mind you, you could add half the packet while cooking the meat, then put in the sauce and the beans, and then add the powder later on if you find it's not spicy enough. But it's not so much just for the spiciness in my case. It does add to the flavor. All right, let's get the pepper. Pepper, we're going to add about half a tablespoon. Not a lot. Worcestershire sauce. or Worcestershire. Depending on your locality, you might pronounce it differently. So I'm going to put in a good 3 tablespoons of this. 1, 2, 3. Now for my so-called secret ingredient, which is just regular barbecue sauce, I'm going to put the entire thing in there. Here it goes. Now that we have a lot more liquid, I would say the pot is about a third full, we can turn the heat back up to medium. Now, when it's going to come to the sauce that you're going to use, tomato sauce, spaghetti sauce, I like to use spaghetti sauce because it adds an extra dimension of flavor. It really doesn't matter which kind you take unless it's like really, really spicy or really, really chunky. It's not going to make an overall difference. So I got a variety of spaghetti sauces that were just laying around in my cupboard. So we're going to go ahead and toss them in. Now this recipe calls for 6. I may add some more later if I don't find it that it's liquid enough, but I'm going to pour in 6 jars of this of about, let's see, about 640 milliliters. So we're going to pour in 6 of these, and then we're going to start adding the beans. If you have a very thin lining pot like I do, about now is a good time to reduce it back to low, because the bottom of the pot might burn and the top might not get very warm. So I just reduced it to very low. And on the subject of the beans, I started to open the cans. I should remind you, if you're preparing this in advance, you should strain the beans, strain the cans of beans before you put them in. Don't add the juice to the mix. Sorry for the long cut, folks. It was a little bit of a crisis happened here. My large pot that I had before, like I told you, the bottom was very thin. It fell out. So I caught the leak just in time. I've transferred it to 2 other pots, so we're going to be good. The recipe is going to go on, but it's now in 2 separate pots instead of that big one. Big stores, cheap things, not a good idea sometimes. Anyway, it happens. Here's another humorous moment that I would like to share with you. Just a minute ago, I was having an argument with one of the cans, trying to open it to get the beans out. It turns out that very clever, they now have an orientation. Cans have a direction, label side up. So you would say, right? Well, not so much, because for my entire life, and not all cans are like this yet, but some cans, you cannot open them if they're upside down because the bottom has been rounded somewhat so that you can stack them. Like I said, very clever, but tricky if you haven't noticed and you're not wearing your glasses. So yeah, that was kind of funny. I thought you'd enjoy that. We have now gotten to the tricky part of this recipe. And why is it the tricky part? Well, because we have to let this simmer. Beans take a long time to cook, and if you don't want all of your recipe to burn, you can't really turn the heat up. So you have to put these both on a very low temperature, and you have to let them simmer. While they are simmering, it is a good time to just take a spoon and dip it, or in my case, I will take my wooden spoon here because I'm all alone, and do your first taster's test. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is rather sweet as it is, not really spicy. So the chili has done its thing, the barbecue sauce has done its thing. Now we need to add some spice to it. And the spice to it is that I showed you before. and they are the crushed chili peppers that you see here. Now, you don't need to be adding tons of this stuff for it to get out of hand. So what I suggest you do is you go 1 teaspoon at a time. Now, a teaspoon in a pot this size, even though it's divided, is not going to make it instantaneously burn your mouth. So since it's going to cook for about 2 or 3 hours at this very low temperature, I suggest you add your first teaspoon in your pots in this case, and then come back and taste it in about an hour and repeat every hour. Isn't it nice when you get to turn off the fan and it becomes all quiet again? So here we are. We're at the very last stage. We covered both pots. They are at the lowest possible temperature. I wouldn't say lowest possible temperature. That would be incorrect. It is at a just above the lowest setting. So there's numbers on this thing, low being 1, 2 being the number right after. It's in between both, so 1.5. Same thing for this guy. So we're going to put them at 1.5. The lowest temperature where it still cooks. I think that was the key I wanted to mention. And we're going to let that simmer for about an hour, and then we'll come back, taste it, and if it's not spicy enough, we have another opportunity to up the ante when it comes to the peppers, and we're going to repeat that possibly up to 3 times, but in about 3 hours everything should be cooked nice and easy. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I just came up. I was downstairs resting for a little bit. I decided to switch the pots about 30 minutes ago because they don't heat evenly, so this is my strategy to keep the heat even in both of them. So it's time to taste, and it's time to see if we're going to add a little bit more spice. So let's open this up. Oh my God, it smells heavenly. Lids are kind of hot. Stir, stir. It's spicy. Not very much so. In fact, it's just a tad weak. Same here. So we're going to be adding a little bit more, about the same quantity. So a teaspoon, and just over a little teaspoon because that pot is a little bit bigger. So another hour simmering, and then it will be time to turn everything off. You can still add some seasoning at the very, very, very end if you want to, but my guess is with this quantity, it will be just fine. Stir that up. Put the lids back on. And I will see you in 60 minutes. So we're going to let these sit overnight, and tomorrow morning I'm going to jar some. And the others I'm going to put in a container that goes into the freezer so that I can keep them for this winter. Now this is pretty spicy stuff, so it will keep at moderately refrigerated temperature, so there's no chance they're going to go bad overnight. And after we've jarred them together tomorrow, I am going to have a bowl for lunch, which I am going to share with you, and that's how we're going to close out this video. So and see you tomorrow, which is going to be for you in 2 minutes. Good morning, we're back. We're about to put some chili back in the jars. Cheers. You are going to need a sharp knife for this. You are going to need a pair of good robust scissors, and as you can see here, you are going to need a bottle of soda. So how do we do this? First, we're going to grab one of our jars. Let me switch to the side camera here so that you guys can see this properly. All right, so grab the jar, grab the soda bottle, If you have a felt pen handy, it's going to be really handy right now. But you're going to want to mark. If you turn the soda bottle, make sure it's empty. I rinsed it out earlier on with some water. So you're going to want to put it on the edge here. Grab your marker and trace a line along the edge. Like this. Doesn't matter if it's not perfect. Try to keep it straight. And there you go. Now, why am I doing this, you wonder? It's quite simple. I'm going to take this and I'm going to create a funnel out of it. Because the jar has an odd shape. The lip, the mouth of it is a little bit short. So I'm going to cut just a little bit above the line that I just traced, and that is going to become the part of the funnel that goes into the jar. And I'm going to keep myself a good, I would say 3 inches of the top of the bottle, and boom, instant funnel. There you have it, folks. You have your funnel jar. I'm going to use a fairly large spoon. Now there's no point in trying to heap your spoon because it's just going to leak if you do that. So, actually I'm right-handed. I should do this the other way, but it's not very convenient for you to view. Allow me to switch sides. I also suggest you do this over the sink because the funnel is quite malleable. It's going to fold and it may leak, as it certainly will in my case, but it's a lot easier to do it this way than try to do it any other way. And there you have it. So I've been asked in the past by some friends of mine, can you freeze these? And the answer is, you actually can, but there's a couple of caveats. You have to be careful of a few things. First of all, you can't really tighten the lid completely. You have to leave a little bit of air coming in or out, because if there's no air that, if there's no air that can go in or out, what happens is, well, the sauce, when it freezes, because it contains water, it'll expand. And when it expands, if it's got nowhere to go, it will bust the jar. And that brings us to the second thing. You got to leave a little gap. You can't fill it completely to the top because as I explained a minute ago, it's going to expand when it freezes. So you got to leave it room for that. And the room at the top that you have to leave has to be before it starts to narrow. Now that's very important because when it narrows, right, when the top of the jar narrows, when everything starts to freeze and going up, if there's actually a significant amount of force that is applied to the lip when it goes up, it will pop the top. So leave about 2 inches from the top in your jar and you're pretty much good to go. Personally, I'd recommend using a mason jar rather than using these if you're going to freeze it, or you can use these very handy airtight plastic containers. And as you'll note, I'm still leaving quite a bit of a gap at the top before I stop filling them. So there you have it. Hello again, everybody. I didn't make it for lunch, but here we are at dinner time. I finally made it. And well, the advantage of being able to have dinner with you means that I can have a beer with my chili. So one of the interesting things about the beer I've selected is that it is a white beer, and as ingredients go, sometimes they will put coriander or cilantro, depending where you're from. You might call that cilantro. And cilantro is also often an ingredient that you will find in foods that are spicy, such as chili. So I thought they would be a good combination. So here we are. We're gonna have a little bite, and you'll get my review after. This is quite good. Some of the spiciness seems to have attenuated ever so slightly since we've first cooked it, but I'm enjoying this immensely. I had managed to find myself some tortillas that I bought at the grocery store, and I warmed up in the pan. Let's have a little drink. Oh yeah, this is a very nice combination. Well, I guess this is it for me. I'm going to finish having dinner, if you don't mind. And thank you very much for joining me in my channel. I hope I'll see you soon again. And just remember, if I can do something like this, of course you can. So cooking is not a destination, it's a journey. Enjoy. This is quite good. Some of the spiciness seems to have attenuated ever so slightly since we've first cooked it, but I'm enjoying this immensely. I had managed to find myself some tortillas that I bought at the grocery store, and I warmed up in the pan. Let's have a little drink. Oh yeah, this is a very nice combination. Well, I guess this is it for me. I'm going to finish having dinner, if you don't mind. And thank you very much for joining me in my channel. I hope I'll see you soon again. And just remember, if I can do something like this, of course you can. So cooking is not a destination, it's a journey. Enjoy.